All right, man. Dude, yeah, it's been a while since we got to see each other. You probably don't remember that great because I'm sure Sammy was talking your ear off the entire night at
Yeah.
at at the Goat whenever y'all played there.
That was a
Man,
couple
it
years
was
ago now. Yeah.
that show was fucking amazing, man. And then
Thank you. That was a fun one. It was kind of that was a crazy day for me because we had a day off beforehand, and my wife has Crohn's disease, but this was right before she was getting her diagnosis, and she was really ill. So we played in Florida. I flew to California, like helped her out, cleaned the house, took her to the doctor, got her a bunch of stuff, took care of the dogs. Then the next morning, I was on a flight to New Orleans. Got there, the flight was delayed. I got there at like 9. Thankfully, it's New Orleans, so everything runs super late. And then did the gig, and then yeah, we went on with the tour. That was a crazy fucking day.
yeah, man. And dude, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that the new Solid Echoes release by Gruesome is just top fucking notch, man. Uh,
Thanks.
I'm a huge fan of everything that you put your hands on. I mean, I pretty much told you that in person, but I'll say it again here. Uh, and you need to bring Gruesome down to Louisiana or somewhere close, like Houston or some shit, man, so I can make that trip.
Yeah, we are working on some gigs right now. I'm hoping in the next week or two we should be able to announce some stuff. I'm not sure if we're getting that close to NOLA, but we're starting in Florida, so we're not going to be, you know, as far away as we would if we were starting out here. So
Yeah. Well, I could make Florida easy too. So
there
I
you
mean, because I was actually I believe you were also a part of the Brass Mug show for the Chuck Schuldiner tribute. Back it was probably 2 or 3 years ago in Tampa.
was that the
Uh,
one with James?
yes, with
Yeah,
James.
yeah. We did those two gigs with James and Terry, doing the spiritual record. Yeah, that was a fucking time, man.
Man, it was. I mean, it was my first time being in Tampa, first time being around those guys, and they were so approachable. I think I met you initially in passing. I mean, just there was so much going on that night as well. So,
Yeah,
um,
that was a hectic fucking weekend for sure.
yeah. But man, what I like to do on my podcast, Matt, is like I said, man, on my pitch to you is just trying to just get your story, man. Like to get to know more about you. I'm sure you probably spoke about yourself ad infinitum over the years, but man, it's great to get to know you personally. So that's what I like doing here.
Sure, man. Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty much an open book. So yeah, whatever you want to know, just fire away.
Yeah. Well, let's just start with. I mean, how was your childhood, dude? Like, what was life living? Was it always in California?
Yeah, I grew up in San Jose. I let's see, my dad was like an assistant manager at a grocery store. My mom was a nurse. She was a nurse at Stanford for a while. Then she ended up getting into teaching. Um, you know, I don't know. As a kid, I think really I was really interested in anything comic books, anything Spider-Man, anything Star Wars. I was born in 75. So, you think about when I was 5 or 6, 80, 81, 82, there's a lot of Star Trek 2, Empire Strikes Back, Conan the
Hell
Barbarian,
yes.
um, and I was riding my bike down to the comic store all the time. And that was kind of my whole deal is I wanted to once I figured out that like you couldn't get superpowers in real life, I wanted to be a comic book artist. And I ended up going to this. I got a scholarship, like an academic scholarship, to this really good school, this really prestigious elementary school. And so that kind of changed things. Like when I started second grade, all my friends' dads were like anesthesiologists, and they had like vacation homes in Lake Tahoe, and you go to like a slumber party, and they'd have like tennis courts at their house and shit.
Yeah.
That was weird. Um, and but I got a really good education, I think was the main point. And then after I became a disciplinary problem because I had to get in a lot of fights, and I was in like the drama class. I used to write all these like sort of, you know, in my fifth grade mind, these like smutty plays or whatever, because I had to like write these little skits, and mine would always be about, you know, tits and ass and whatever. So I would get in trouble at school, and eventually they're like, "Well, you know, we don't want to give you a scholarship anymore, but you know, you're welcome to continue attending." And my folks were like, "Yeah, we can't afford this shit."
Yeah.
So I went back to public school in seventh grade, and that was right when I started discovering metal. You know, like
Yeah.
'87, and my parents split up, I think, in '88. So it was kind of like a weird time. You know.
Mhm.
So I went from, you know, having tons of friends and playing sports and doing theater and all this stuff to going to public school, and like the curriculum at school was not challenging at all. It was like really easy, and I didn't know anybody, and you know, I'm, you know, 11, 12, so starting to get pimples and like inappropriate boners and stuff, you know, as as you do. Um, and so that was kind of, you know, that was a perfect time for me to get into metal, you know, because I was pretty isolated and pissed off, you know, just was in a new place, didn't know anybody, hated the school, hated the teachers, you know,
Yeah.
because it was just, I was like, I'm not learning anything. This is fucking, it's a waste of my fucking time. Um, and so, yeah, I got really into metal, and, you know, ended up, uh, I guess my granddad, my mom's dad, his when he was retired, he was into like, he did like a bunch of antique shit. So I sold him my comic book collection, spent the money on a guitar, and yeah, then just started trying to like get a band going, you know.
So, but like, what was the transition as far as music? Like, what were there anything that you was into prior to your first metal band?
I mean, you know, my dad's mom, my grandmother on that side, she was a piano teacher. She taught kids piano and stuff. She used to play, very Catholic Sicilian woman, used to play organ at the funeral home and stuff. um, and my mom's brother, the sort of stereotypical, you know, rocker uncle, black sheep of the family guy,
Yeah.
he was like a jazz fusion guy. He was really into, you know, Mahavishnu Orchestra and Return to Forever and Chick Corea and all that kind of stuff. So music was always around. And my dad, despite, I mean, not, I mean, he knows a couple chords, but he doesn't really play. But he's a huge music listener. My dad's always listening to music. I mean, to this day, he just sits around and, you know, his thing now that he's been retired for years, he just, now weed's legal. He'll just, you know, smoke a joint, try some new random IPA he'll tell me about, and, you know, listen to Robin Trower or whatever. So there was always music, you know. Um, I didn't really think about it. I think the first music I was personally interested in was more like, you know, the Star Wars soundtrack, or like
Yeah.
Chariots of Fire soundtrack. And I had like, you know, a couple of like Back to the Future, Ghostbusters, and those kind of records. But I was always listening to, you know, stuff my parents listened to. It was like Cream, Jefferson Airplane, Hendrix, Beatles, you know, a lot of 60s stuff, the Zombies, the Turtles, Mamas and Papas, Country Joe, you know, I
Yeah.
was very steeped in all that. And then when I was about 10, I discovered like, I guess it was, yeah, because I was 85, 86. I discovered Run DMC and LL Cool J and Beastie Boys and like, you know, the Fat Boys, Eric B. and Rakim
Dude,
stuff.
I'm so glad someone brings up the Fat Boys. Hell yes, because look, I was talking, somebody asked me, they turned the tables on me and asked me what, you know, what I got into when I was younger, and I remember having a fucking boom box, and in my yard, I had, like, my 3 favorite tapes at the time that I inherited from an older cousin. He gave me Fat Boys Crushin', and he gave me, he gave me the live Ozzy Osbourne and, the Randy Rhoads tribute, cassette,
Dude,
and, what was the 3rd one? I think it might have been maybe two Fat Boys tapes, really.
So good. I have to imagine your cousin is how old is your cousin? He's like
Same
50.
age as you, 1975.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, as a 10-year-old that doesn't know anything, you hear the Fat Boys and they're like rapping about eating a bunch of hot dogs. It's just this is like the coolest thing you've ever heard. Because
Hell
that's
yes.
what you relate to, you know. You never had a girlfriend, you know. You're like,
Yep.
but you know
Yep.
about hot dogs. And then yeah, this kid in sixth grade before I went back to public school, this new kid transferred to our school and he was like, "Are you into heavy metal?" I was like, "What's heavy metal?" And it's like, "Oh, you're probably a fucking pussy then." And I was like, "It's what?" I was so confused. And then you know, it was '87 when I really started listening to metal, and it was like the first Cinderella record was out. That was a big one. The first Poison record was a big one. That Ozzy Randy tribute tape was one of the first tapes I got.
Yep.
Um, you know, Twisted Sister was still around. Quiet Riot was still a thing. I heard Somewhere in Time. I really was excited to hear Maiden because I liked all the artwork. You know, I used to see it before I ever heard the band, and I was like, I don't know what that is, but that's fucking cool.
Yeah. Same.
Oh, it's a heavy metal band. I should hear this. That was a really big one. And then I did the 12 tapes for a penny deal, you know.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, like Columbia House and BMG. Oh yeah, I was all about that. I used to use neighbors as addresses to get more and more subscriptions, and it would all go to them. And I just patiently wait for the mailman to come down the street.
right? I just be
I
like,
was committing I was committing mail fraud.
I mean, with the way it was set up, I mean, who could blame you, you know? And the great thing was, I got in trouble for non-payment, and I asked my granddad about it because he was a former policeman, and he's like, "You're 11, you can't enter into this contract," and he just wrote him a letter like, "Yeah, well, this is my grandson, he's 11, you can't," and then they just stopped sending me stuff, and so it was cool, but yeah, in those 12 tapes, there was like Wasp was in there, the first Wasp, and Inside the Electric Circus, Sacred Heart by Dio, Last in Line was in there, the Whitesnake self-titled album, which is one of my all-time favorites. But finally, like I kind of made my way. You know, it was a big commitment to listen to 12 new albums back
Oh
then.
yeah, it really was.
It was a time commitment, and you know, I really everyone would you kind of try to let it sink in or whatever. And I saved Master of Puppets and Peace Cells for the end because they were the scary ones, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and so I put in Master of Puppets, and this is like you know late '87, I guess. And yeah, I think it was in November or December because I seem to remember I was at my grandparents and they had their Christmas tree up anyway, and so everyone had gone to bed, and I'm just sitting there with my Walkman listening to it, and I was just like, "Holy shit!" Like this is what I've been looking for, you know. Like this is
Yeah.
what I didn't know that I was looking for. You know, because like I said, I was you know pretty alienated. I was at a school I didn't know anybody. I was really felt like a fish out of water, and you know, there's a lot of changes, a lot of upheaval. My parents are, you know, separating or whatever. So all this sort of angst and all this stuff, you know, it just finally found like the right voice for it, you know, when I heard that tape. And,
Right.
you know, from there, it was just like, well, I guess I don't need this Twisted Sister tape anymore. Like, fuck this shit. And then, yeah, then it just was like, I want to hear something heavier. I want to hear something faster. I want to hear something more intense. And it was just, you know, the next few years was just crazy.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned, 1988, being like your family's being, air quotes, ripped apart, by divorce. And, and then like you have another wave of fucking releases that year, like Injustice for All, which is one of the most angry, Metallica records in their discography, arguably. But it didn't, you found that one, I'm sure, that year, huh?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you know, really, like as soon as I heard Master Brothers, it was like everything shifted, and it was like Iron Maiden went from being like this is really intense to being like this is the softest thing I want to hear. You know, they were like one of the only bands that I kind of didn't leave behind immediately. You know, and it was just and it was just this whole other world to get into, and I lived in the suburbs in San Jose. It's like, sure, you're 40 miles from San Francisco, but when you're 12 or whatever, you wouldn't even know how to find a cool record store. And even if you did, your parents aren't going to be like, I'm not going to drive 40 minutes in traffic so you can fucking look at tapes and buy one. Like, no.
Yeah, I had the same upbringing, man, because, I lived in a small town that was probably 1 square mile
Oh, shit.
altogether, yeah, and, just really, like, separated by a highway, and, the next closest town that had, like, really cool record stores is where I currently live, and, that's a good half hour's drive, and, like your parents, my mom and dad was like, "Yeah, we're not w" in the '80s? No, they were not gonna drive me to go get a records, out of a whim that I saw either in a magazine or MTV, something.
Right. Right. You're like, I saw an ad for this album called Persecution Mania by Sodom. Can you drive me 45 minutes to maybe find it at a store that you don't want me to go into? I remember my mom took me to like the local head shop to get like my first, Metallica and Megadeth shirts. And she was just appalled that her 12-year-old was like, rifling through all this stuff. And she was like, I'm never taking you there again. And I was like, well, this is at least in San Jose. I can take the bus here. I could
Yeah, yeah.
ride my bike if I had to. Um, but yeah, I mean, I just the one thing that was cool is because school was really no effort for me to get decent grades because I had thankfully gone to a really high level elementary school, so I managed to stay out of trouble with no real effort in school, and so all my time was spent like trying to learn more about metal, reading every magazine I could. You start with Circus and Hit Parader, and then
Yep.
you discover there was a magazine called Thrash Metal going. There was Power Metal was like Hit Parader's sort of like thrash magazine, and then if you went to the next, San Jose is just like a giant suburb upon a suburb upon a suburb that leads to another suburb. And if you go kind of 2 suburbs over, there was a Tower Records, and they had like Metal Forces sometimes, and that was like, fuck, if you could find Metal Forces, like you were gonna learn some shit.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
you know, and like my tenure as like a comic book nerd really prepared me well because especially back, in the 90s, 80s and before, everything's interconnected and they would always tell you about it. Like you'd be reading an issue of a comic of the Avengers or whatever, and they would be doing a thing and they're like, oh, if only Thor were here. And then there'd be a little asterisk
Yeah.
and say, Thor's out doing this in his own comic. And you'd be like, fuck, I better get that comic and find out what that's about. So it was the same thing in metal. You'd be like, oh, this guy from this band's wearing this shirt. I should pay attention to this band. Oh, this band thanked them in their thanks list, or they toured with this band. That's how, the first time I heard Venom was like, oh, Metallica opened for Venom when they started out. I should hear Venom. And I was like, holy fuck, it's fucking Venom.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so, it was a really, it was a fun thing to obsess on. And, at the time, 88, when I was really getting into it, was a great time because the stuff that was, you know, the early days was still close enough to where everything you could still find. If you wanted to find Pleasure to Kill, you could find that tape, Darkness Descends, and all those kinds of things. And yet at the same time, you had new records coming out all the time that were heavier and heavier and heavier. And I remember getting like Scream Bloody Gore and Bathory Under the Sign of the Black Mark and just being like, what the fuck? Holy shit.
Yeah.
And, you know, and you still had South of Heaven, you still had Justice and So Far So Good, So What, and, and all these sorts of things. And then Leprosy is coming out that year too. And, so it just was, it was it was a good time to be into extreme metal because it was like kind of, it was still happening in real time all around you, but there was also kind of enough of a foundation that where when you had $10 a week and you could buy one cassette tape and a Slurpee, you know what I mean? It was like a lot to catch up on. You hear Rain and Blood, you're like, well, fuck, now I got to hear Hell Awaits, then I got to hear Show No Mercy, and I got to get a Hunt in the Chapel and Live Undead and so on and so forth. And, I was really like, I wanted to sort of absorb as much as I could. And then
Mhm.
that naturally, led me to wanting to play guitar and make my own band. And that was always the goal, was like, oh, if I learn how to play guitar, then I can make my own songs and do something.
Yeah, and, as far as, like, picking up the guitar, I mean, were you self-taught? You take some lessons initially, or
No, I was self-taught. I mean, I remember my dad had an old uh actually it's like you can see that acoustic guitar there in the corner.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
sure do.
yeah, it's an old 68 Hofner. Um and he had it in the closet kind of collecting dust, and I remember picking it up, and all I really knew was like the higher up you went that way, the higher the pitch got, right?
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, like, what's something that's kind of cool, but seems like maybe, a good test. So I started trying to figure out down, bam, 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 bam. And, I was able to figure out at least the first part by ear, the da 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 da. That was a little challenging. And, you know, I, my dad was like, yeah, go ahead and play it. I don't give a shit. And I remember the first time I broke a string, I was like, my dad's going to kill me. He's like, oh, it's no big deal. You just like go get another string. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. Um, and so, of course, I started begging my parents, like, oh, I need an electric guitar. Like, you can't play this kind of music on acoustic. And they're like, well, if you keep playing it, then let's talk in a few months. And I did, and we did. And so we went to the flea market and got another, like this shitty little SG copy. And I talked to my grandma, who the piano player, and she's like, well, like, what are you listening to? And I remember I played her the song Master of Puppets, and she's like, well, here's the thing, like, you can't really, like, there's not a lot of commonality between what's going on here and piano. So I mean, like, I can't really help you here, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of music going on here. And she was the first person in my family to hear what I was listening to and be like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Everybody else was like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like, why would you listen to this? um so I just was, my dad showed me, like, here's a G chord, here's D, here's C, A, E. And he had some old songbooks. It was like, oh, if you want to learn, like, the Kinks or something, like, here you go. um, so I learned, just a little bit of that stuff, and like Pipeline, and then that was about it. Really, I just sat around playing by ear, and when I figured out that if you put your palm against the strings, it goes chuck chuck chuck, even on an acoustic guitar, that was like, oh my god, whoa, I'm gonna do this forever. And I mean, I guess I have. um, you know, and so it was like anything else. So, like, like most kids at that era, I mean, even today, I think probably I started out trying to learn how to play like Kill 'Em All, because that seemed like it was the easier Metallica album. And then when I got Morbid Tales, trying to figure those songs out. And that was the first time that I played somebody else's song. And I was like, this kind of sounds like as good as the band playing it.
Yeah.
Because it's real simple, and it's really kind of knuckle draggy Neanderthal, riffs. And, you know, that kind of gave me the confidence to just keep going. And, by like, I guess I started playing probably 88. Um, and then by like, 89, the end of 89, I was like learning to play like the stuff on Scream Bloody Gore, and then Leprosy, and just really, I was way too awkward to like get dates or anything, and I wasn't involved in any school activities, and I only had like a few friends that we would occasionally play like, tabletop role playing games or whatever. So I had plenty of time to practice, and that's just kind of what I did.
Yeah, man, and, I know obviously, death is a huge part of, what inspires you as a player, as a musician, as a person, and I'm really curious to know, like, what was it like seeing death for the first time as a teenager?
The first time, the most memorable thing about the first time I saw Death is that I only saw one and a half songs. They were playing at this old club called the Omni in Oakland in the late '80s. There was like these three clubs all owned by the same guy, and everybody played there. Like, basically, if you couldn't play in the big theater like the Warfield, like Testament would play there. Exodus would play some of the bigger places, but everybody that was like Violence Forbidden or on tour that was on like Combat or Metal Blade or whatever would play these clubs. And like the bigger bands, sometimes even like the bigger bands, like I remember Wasp, they would do like 2 nights of the one in Oakland and one night of the one in San Francisco or whatever, but everybody played there. And Death and Devastation came in March of 1990. And, I somehow talked my dad into giving me and my buddy Cole, who was the original Exhumed drummer, he gave us a ride up to Oakland from San Jose. And he's like, look, just be outside at midnight. Like, and if you're not outside, I'm leaving your fucking ass in Oakland. And my dad, it wasn't like, mean, but he wasn't like a nice dad, like
Yeah.
sure he wouldn't have in hindsight, but at 14, I was like, yeah, he might. And I remember Death, they took forever somehow, and they were going on, and like they started Living Monstrosity, and it was already like, it was already after midnight by the time that song was done. And so it was like, well, we got to stay a little bit longer. And so we saw, I can't remember what the second song was. We saw a little bit of that, and it was like, okay, we got to go. My dad's going to fucking kill me. Even if he doesn't leave us here, like I'm going to be grounded. It's going to be a whole thing, because it's a special privilege to go out by yourself to this club. It's not in the greatest neighborhood. Anyway, so yeah, my dad's out there like TikTok motherfucker. Like that's really the thing I remember the most about the first time I saw them. And I just felt so cheated, I was just so sad about it. But they came back the same year. They came back in October. And, kind of a lot had changed really, at least, in my tastes and like in our little circle of friends by this time. Because by then, we were all listening to Napalm Death, Carnage, Cadaver, Entombed, Carcass, Terrorizer, Extreme Noise Terror. Like, I had like the Axe Grinder Prophecy of Doom CD because I started working in April of 1990. So all I did was buy records, CDs. All I did was buy CDs. And so we were discovering all of this stuff, and we'd started ordering stuff through the mail, getting like the Agoraphobia 7-inch and like one of the Incantation 7-inches and Mortician and stuff. So when Death came back in 1990, it was still great, but it was a little tame. And James had left the band. James Murphy had left the band, and it was Albert Gonzalez from Evil Dead. Great guitar player. I would not James Murphy. And obviously, this is well before the internet was commonly used. So I just showed up and I was like, Terry, Bill, Chuck, some dude. This guy. And I was like, he's not as good as James Murphy. Like, fuck. And they played with Carcass and Pestilence. And so it's like Carcass is playing Symphony of the Sickness. And, I remember me and Cole, same kid, we were always telling our friends, like, Creator's good, Coroner's good, but like, dude, you should be listening to Napalm Death. You should be listening to Carcass. Like, this is really a lot heavier. And our friends like, I don't get it. This is noise. This sucks. It's shitty.
Yeah.
And then some of them were at that show, and on the ride home, they're like, oh, this is what you guys have been like annoying us about. And I was like, see? And I was like, all these songs we've been writing in our garage, they're all fucking wimpy. Like, we're getting rid of all of them, and we're gonna play something heavier now. So that was just kind of a revelation, that whole gig, because Carcass was so gross, and Pestilence was so aggressive, and Death, they were amazing, but they were, they felt so kind of clinical and, almost hoity-toity with how musical they were, in comparison with the barbarism of the other two bands, But I did meet Chuck that day, which was, exciting moment for a 14-year-old. I was like, oh, can you sign my flyer? This is so cool. And I met Bill here too, and I met like 3 of the Pestilence guys, not Martin. So yeah,
I'm pretty sure I would have had the same exact, response towards Chuck saying my shit. Like, I'm surprised. I mean, I think what held me back from doing the same, act when I met you in New Orleans was because I'm over 40 now. So
right. I remember telling him too, because like one of the things, I guess, I've talked about it a lot for this gruesome press cycle. One of the things that was cool was that, as a fan, you're watching Chuck grow in real time from record to record to record and trying to, take these big swings every time. And, as a kid playing guitar, you never improve more than you do in the first like 3 years in terms of
Yeah.
just the rate of improvement. Like you'll
Yeah.
get better, but like, going from 0 to year 3, you're like, holy shit. And so, I kind of felt like I'm chasing this guy. It's like, okay, I kind of got down Scream Bloody Gore. It's like, fuck, then leprosy is going to take me months to figure out. And then spiritual healing comes out. It was like, oh my God, whoa. It was a very technical record at the time. You hear that melodic breakdown in Living Monstrosity. I mean, my little brain was confetti. Um, and so, I'm just getting the hang of that. And then, I remember when I met him, I was like, I play guitar and like, I love figuring out your stuff and like seeing how much you guys improve every album. And I'm trying to like, learn and get better like you are. And, it was really nice. I mean, even at, however old he was at the time, 21, 22, a 14-year-old kid is like a little kid.
Yeah. Yeah.
he,
Yeah.
was, he was very sweet. Just like, oh, thanks, man. That's so cool. Like, thanks for coming to the show. Right on, but yeah, I mean, that's the only time that I ever met Chuck. But that was that night. I mean, that was a pretty significant like musical night, I think, for me and for a lot of people into death metal in the Bay Area. That was kind of the show that proved that death metal was for real, because obviously growing up, 40 miles from Oakland and San Francisco, you know, Exodus, Testament, Rocket, Metallica, like they're fucking
Yeah.
gods, they were like already gods. And then it was like this death metal scene was like, oh, this is a down to earth new thing that, you know, is doesn't have that sort of commercial potential that, a band like, even Exodus or whatever did. So you kind of felt like this was your own thing. And going to that show, even though, it was pretty well attended, but at the time I thought it was a really small show. Like, oh, there's only like 300 people here.
Yeah.
Little did I know what the future would hold. But, I was used to seeing, Anthrax, Exodus, and Halloween in front of 5,000 people. I was used to seeing Testament, Nuclear Assault, and Voivod in front of 3,500 people. Um, you know, so the idea, that going to a show and there's only, there's under 500 people there is like, wow, this is new. We saw Coroner that year. And then at the end of the year, we saw Sepultura and Obituary and Sadis. That was a big deal as well. So it was kind of this signal that there was this new underground thing that was really coming in and able to get people excited. That wasn't just thrash.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I can about imagine just being in that area, like you said, with all those thrash titans that were within a stone's throw of you. I mean, it was like probably like you were probably gearing up for something more and something more like more extreme for your taste.
Yeah, I mean, I think it, because I guess, by that time, I heard Metallica so quickly. It wasn't like I listened to, Maiden and Ozzy for 5 years and then thrash came along or came on my radar. It was like, I listened to that for like 4 months. And then, then I heard Puppets, and then Bonded by Blood and Pleasures of the Flesh and Peace Cells and Rain and Blood, Hell Awaits and whatever. So it was, I was new enough to still be very hungry for more. And, like I said, those guys were like gods to me, and they were on TV, like
Yeah.
it's because it was much more of a monoculture before, even with cable, you had like 25 channels tops,
Right.
right?
Right.
Now you have 400 channels and then there's 87 websites and Reddit and TikTok so everything is so kind of subgenred and fragmented out. Somebody could be a huge star and somebody else would never have heard of them. But back then it was like Metallica had just played on the fucking Grammys. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
they were coming into the living room of millions and millions of people, and so that level, like I said, even where Exodus was, just seemed so unattainable. But to play at the Omni in front of 300 people, I was like, oh, okay, maybe maybe that could be a thing. And and they were doing it in a way that was, heavier, more brutal, and in some, certainly some cases it was a lot cruder than, what the thrash guys were doing, especially by the end of the 80s. I mean, that's kind of
Yeah.
where thrash gets the edges filed off. And Exodus goes from like, let's kill posers to like, hey man, like don't drink and drive, that's like dangerous. Um, so you have these bands. It was a great time because yeah, you have these bands that are more established, kind of seeing what they could do in terms of the real mainstream. It's not
Mhm.
like Capitol is licensing an Exodus record from Combat. Like, no, they're just on Capitol now, and they're making Impact is imminent. And it's yeah, Capitol's not going to stand for fucking rape and murder your wife and all this shit. That's not what they want.
Yeah.
They want another band that's going to be socially conscious and sing about how toxic waste is bad that they can, sell to Metallica fans.
Yeah.
And I
That
mean,
being
even
said,
Slayer was quieting down. South of Heaven's a lot tamer than Rain and Blood, and Seasons of the Abyss is even tamer. So all these kids that got into this music because they thought it was the heaviest thing ever were like, wait a second, you guys are not being as heavy as you used to. But here's all these new bands. And there was a 89, 90 was just a great time. Autopsy and Obituary and Death and Morbid Angel and Terrorizer and Carcass and on, where it's the first time you could buy their stuff at a record store. You don't have to trade cassettes with somebody.
so I would assume that all the visual art and all the like the concept art of all these death metal bands that you had mentioned back in the day, and your love for art, kind of that was that the everything put in the cauldron to make Exhumed, I'm sure.
Definitely. I remember like the only Earache before they signed the distribution deal with Combat in 91, the only way he could get Earache records was easily in the Bay Area at record stores was on vinyl. For whatever reason, I could find Napalm Death LPs, but I couldn't find CDs. And I didn't really like vinyl because that's what my dad listened to. Now all I buy is vinyl. But anyway, so I got 70s of Sickness on vinyl because that's what was available. And I just remember opening it up and just staring, like the whole duration of the record, just looking, and it's this really crappy print job to where you can't read the lyrics. They're like in light blue over the pictures of all the dead bodies. Can't read
Mhm.
shit. And even what you could read, you're like, what the fuck? Like, what are these
Yeah.
words? I don't even know what this is. But yeah, the artwork was awesome. It was really, I loved staring at album covers. Even before I was into music, some of my dad's albums, I used to look at like Disraeli Gears or like Hellbound Train by Savoy Brown or Brain Salad Surgery by Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Santana, Abraxas. Like I love that album cover. I don't really like Santana, but that cover is great. And so I used to just stare at this stuff and look at it. And, especially with the death metal stuff, a lot of it was a little bit more crude, the illustrations and stuff.
Right.
And I was still drawing a lot back then. It was better than what I was drawing, but it wasn't like I'll never get there better. It was like, well, maybe if I keep drawing, I can draw like the Severed Survival cover. I could draw something this good, maybe. So there was a DIY-ness that made it, approachable. And it was so wild. The album covers were just so fun and zany. And, Altars of Madness was another one. I had the picture disc of that. And so the whole record is just a globe of all the faces. And you look and
Yeah, yeah.
that face is like this, and that face is like that, and that face. There's like one guy that's got like buck teeth and his tongue sticking out and like cartoon eyes in there somewhere. And yeah, so I mean that it really was, the visual aspect of it was really exciting too, and I think I don't know. To me, I always found that there was a real level of humor in death metal, and I found out later that that was not normal to think that. Um, but I always thought, I'm like, come on, like you can't take this seriously, dude. Like, the Carcass lyrics, I was like, these are hilarious. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, like you can't be like, oh, these guys are, bad influence on the youth. It's like, come on, dude.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
even Morbid Angel, the most serious death metal band, I was like, look at these guys, man. They got like fluffy hair and like leather pants. Like bleed for the devil? Like, come on, this isn't serious. Um,
I'm
you
glad
know,
someone else thinks the way I do.
right. I mean, and I found out later that to the guys in Morbid Angel, apparently it was totally serious, but I
Oh,
did
yeah.
not that at all. I was like, and I remember, there was it was still kind of the end of the Satanic Panic, and Geraldo did his whole special on TV, and
I remember.
it starts with like people talking about don't buy Merciful Fate albums, and it ends with like, if you take your kid to daycare, they're going to get sacrificed and molested. And I remember watching it with my parents, and I was just like, you can't believe this shit. Like, come
Yeah.
on. And I was like, there was a kid like reciting Slayer lyrics. And I'm like, oh yeah, it's Slayer. It's piece by piece. And they're like, you know what this is? I was like, Mom, it's like I watched Nightmare on Elm Street. I watched fucking Reanimator when I was 10 years old. I'm not out like killing people. Like, it's just like reading a fucking Stephen King novel. My dad's got 20 Stephen King books on his fucking shelf. And they're like, huh. So you don't want to like commit crimes? It's like, no, I want to fucking drink soda and like listen to crazy music all night. That's what I'm playing Nintendo and guitar. That's it.
Give me the fucking Mountain Dew.
That was it. And so they're like, well, I guess, as long as you're not in trouble and your grades are good, like, I don't know, if you want to listen to songs about killing people, like that's fine. And yeah, so to me, I always thought that there was like a lot of, because it was taking things to such an extreme that it was you couldn't I couldn't take it seriously in the best way though. You know what I mean? Like it's
Right.
fun, it's slapstick, it's Evil Dead 2, it's Reanimator, which were like my favorite movies because they were totally horrifying and gory, but they were like
Also funny.
right, they know they're over the top. And they're like, yeah, we're having fun with this. Like, look, we're gonna fucking this guy's eyeball's gonna pop out of his head. This chick's gonna scream. It's gonna like go right down her throat. That's funny, it's like Looney Tunes. So yeah, that was always my take on it. From the beginning, I was like, this is fun fucking music. Like, yeah, it's gross and it's disgusting, and that's the fun of it. Just like watching a horror movie.
Yeah. And then so you and Cole, y'all start Exhumed and it was 1990. There was that year in question, and y'all been
Yeah. Well, I
around.
think 90, we talked mostly about being in a band. I think
Okay.
we'd written a couple songs. It seemed like 91 was when we actually like, that was when I think it was like that summer was the right coincidence of everybody had equipment at the same time and we all started working. We all had jobs. Most of us worked at the same gas station. So like we could buy strings and picks and we kind of practiced for like a whole, because it seemed like we would play and then like something would happen and then a couple months would go by and then we'd play for a couple weeks. And it was like 91 when we actually were like 3 days a week we would rehearse. And I think we played our first show in October of 91, like right after I turned 16. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And y'all been at it and you've been at it ever since.
Yeah. I mean, we had like a 6-year hiatus or whatever, but yeah. Yeah, Cole stayed in the band through '03 to the third record. And yeah, I don't know. I'm somehow still still doing this.
Yeah, man. And and doing it really, really well. And then I actually found out about the your involvement with Gruesome from a good friend of mine who was in the Navy.
Oh,
And I went to high school with him as well. And he was like, Mo, like you jam Exhume. Have you ever heard of Gruesome? And I was said, it sounds familiar, but I never looked into them. And then he shot me all the links, on on like a Facebook Messenger or something like that. And I was like, holy fuck. He's like, dude, told you. He's like, you love all that old school death? Check it out. I was like, dude, yeah. And I was like, bro, it's just like fucking spot on. It's like even like to the production value and everything. I was like, holy shit. And then like I started reading, I was like, well, no shit. I was like, wait, before I was like, man, vocalist sounds like Matt Harvey. And I go like, well, no shit. Here it is. It's fucking Matt Harvey.
Yeah, I mean, it was gruesome. Was just like an idea that I thought was kind of like a lark. I thought it was like a bit of a goof, and it just sort of became the snowball kept rolling down the hill and getting bigger and gathering momentum. And now, somehow it's been 10 years since we did the first record, and it's totally insane. You know, and yeah, I mean, it just started as like an offhand comment, and I thought, um, I was like, well, I know those first three records, more or less at the back of my hand, and I'm sure I could come up with something, in that vein, you know, pretty, not easily, but I mean, it's doable. It's not like I just farted and out it came. I tried hard
Right,
to
right, right.
make the songs good or whatever, but I was like, I know this territory, like I could do something here, and I was telling my wife, she was like, "Really, this is what you need as another death metal band?" Like, even if you just did another band, because we listen to a lot of like old late 70s, early 80s metal mostly, and she's like,
Yeah, yeah.
to do this, like I'd get it, but like another death metal band, and I was like, honey, this is just silly. Like nobody's gonna care about this record. Like, and I was wrong.
You was dead wrong on that.
Yeah, I ended up being way off. And it just sort of has led on this decade long side quest into fucking the death universe, such as it is, and it's very, I don't know, it's not nothing I could have predicted or planned, but at the same time it's really fun. Um and it's also weird because I found people ask me questions about Chuck, and I'm like, I didn't know the guy. Like, I don't know.
Yeah,
Like,
you met him when you were 14.
right. I met him for about, 4 minutes in 1990, and it was a lovely 4 minutes. He was a delightful guy. I don't know. Oh, why did he do this? It's like, I don't know. I wasn't there, man. I could tell you like maybe a slightly more educated guess, but like, I don't know. Um, and it's weird because I never, you know, set out to be like death expert number one or anything. I was a big fan, like for sure, like I listened to all the demos and rehearsal tapes and stuff in the 80s or whatever, but I just thought that was part of being like a super fan. I listened to all the Carcass demos and rehearsals and bootleg live LPs and all the Metallica ones and Slayer ones too. Like, I don't know, I just thought it was like, I'm just like a super fan.
Well,
Um,
yeah, it's fucking over. You have been deemed a Chuck expert, so fucking, own it.
I guess, I mean, I'm just, at the end of the day, like, um, it's just like a super fun sandbox to play in. And for whatever reason, the people, the audience has been really okay with what I'm doing. And that was my biggest concern, is I didn't want people to think that Gruesome was like an exploitation thing or a cash in or, I was like, if we're going to do this, we have to lean into the whole thing. We got to have the same production. We got to have the same logo. We got to have the same artwork. The fucking, Savage Land has the Scream Bloody Gore font with the italics
Yeah,
and the quotes.
yeah,
We got to really own it so that even if people think the band sucks or they think the band is unnecessary, they'll be like, well, these guys they're coming from a place of love. I don't want the record. I think it sucks. But that's dumb, but whatever. I just didn't want people to think, oh, these guys are trying to like rip off Chuck's family or they're trying to cash in on somebody else's work that they didn't do and this and that. And that was always my concern about it.
yeah, yeah, and those valid concerns too, because I mean, uh, death is very near and dear to people's hearts. Who's into this, this
Sure.
extreme music. So you know,
And I mean,
and-
and it's also the thing, like, people are always like, oh, what do you think Chuck would think if he was alive today? It's like, well, A, he probably hate it. B, I wouldn't be doing it if he was here. You know what I mean?
right.
Um, it just, there wouldn't be that kind of need, you know? but I think Chuck was really protective of his music. Even in the early '90s, I think he was really aggravated with all these other death metal bands kind of nipping at their heels, and so every album he's trying to pull away from the pack, and do
Yeah.
something different and do something that's his, because just playing death metal is not his anymore. Now it's autopsies and cannibal corpses and morbid blah blah blah. So I think he would not be amused by what we're doing at all. Just like Tom Warrior reportedly hated Warhammer. I don't know if you ever listened to Warhammer. I think Warhammer's sick. It just sounds just like Hellhammer. Uh,
Yeah.
I love Hellhammer, so I was like, look, it's more Hellhammer. This is great.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't listen to it as much as I listen to Hellhammer, but I still like it a lot. But he was like, this is not flattering. This is not charming. This is not cute. Like, no, you're making money off my work. Like, fuck you,
Yeah.
apparently. That's what I was told.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
could be wrong, but I think Chuck would probably have taken a pretty similar idea. But, the cool thing is through all the stuff that we've done with Gruesome and Left to Die and the gig with James and everything, like I've met Beth a couple times, Chuck's sister, and I've met Christopher, his nephew, and they're fucking lovely. And they're just like, we love what you're doing. Like, out there, we know that you love Chuck's work and you're out there doing this for the right reasons. You're keeping our family members' music alive. In my opinion, he doesn't need me to keep it alive, but hey, if I'm adding my voice to the chorus in a way that people appreciate, then that's great. And, that meant a lot to me. That kind of, that felt good, just
Yeah.
knowing like, hey, okay, the people that really matter aren't mad about this and they're actually stoked on it. So
Yeah, they're very supportive, and to me, I mean, everything from an outside perspective, it just seems like they're very receptive. Like you said, they're very receptive to what you're doing, and that goes to show just what kind of people they are. So,
yeah,
amen.
and I think, the I've never spoken to Beth at this just about this because I just don't know her very well at all. But I have to think that family's been through a lot of pain. With Chuck dying so young, and his big brother died.
Yeah,
When Chuck
Frank.
was very young, and I think a lot of that is what informed Chuck to be this brutal guy singing about killing and violence and monsters and stuff in the '80s. Is a lot of trauma from seeing your big brother die at a very young age,
Yeah,
and I think that's his music is his therapy, and all those gross scary lyrics are just a kid's attempt to find some kind of reconciliation with death. And then after that happens, then his family loses Chuck at like, what was he, like 32 or something, to
yeah, he was young, man.
he's young as fuck. So I just, the last thing I would want to do would be to think that, oh, I'm like causing this family that's been through a lot pain, like that would be, I would not be able to sleep at night if that was the case. I would
Yeah,
rather not do it. But
I
they see how many people Chuck touched, and how many people want to go out of their way to, to do things for his legacy. And so that's really cool that it's sad that he never got to see it, but I'm glad they did it at least.
yeah, I feel like I kind of sidestepped the whole exhumed portion of your story, and but just going into gruesome. But we I talked about the artwork and you did as well about just putting together your influences of like Reanimator and Evil Dead into exhumed and in the music and whatnot. So uh whenever you have gotten this idea for exhumed, what were your initial ideas, if you could pull back the curtain a little bit, and into starting exhumed and with all the imagery, like, because I know you have a main character involved,
Right.
and so I'm gonna let you take the reins on that one.
Well, it went through a few different iterations. When we very first started in, 91, basically like from like 91 to 93, when we were like a high school band, just doing like the local opener, pay to play type gigs and stuff. We, at that point, you know, we wanted the sort of like Impetigo meets Carcass kind of like gore imagery. I think we had Steve-O from Impetigo draw the cover for our first 7-inch, which was quite a feather in our cap. Um, and but us ourselves, like at that point, I think metal felt so ubiquitous coming out of the 80s and so typical. Like we used to just go on stage and like like surf shorts and like a Massacre t-shirt or whatever, and we did not, we kind of made it clear that we didn't take ourselves seriously. Obviously we tried to play as well as we could at 16, 17. But we made it clear like we're having a good time doing this. And then that version of the band kind of fell apart, and then the real kind of start of Exhumed properly was like 94-ish. We had Ross come in on vocals first, and a guy named Matt Widener on bass that went on to play in Cretin and the County Medical Examiners. And he was a really good musician, so he was kind of helping us learn to like count and stuff. Those sort of basics that you never got because none of us took lessons. We all just learned from each other and playing in the garage. And so Matt kind of helped us evolve a little bit musically, just in terms of being competent enough to execute the ideas. And then Ross and Cole and I started developing this idea of having like a stage thing, and part of that was in response to black metal, because 94, 95, that's when black metal was blowing up. Death metal
Yeah.
was pretty stale. People were losing interest in it. We had lost interest in, certainly the bands that were on Roadrunner and Earache and stuff. We weren't really paying attention to what they were doing at all. And so we're like, okay, well, how can we compete with, these people that are like, literally killing each other and wearing capes and doing all this shit. And so we started like, we would go to bait shops and get live worms and spit those out on people. We would go to like the Asian grocery stores where you can, they do a lot of cooking in blood. So we'd get like the pig blood and we'd spray that on people. And Ross's sister was a vet tech, so she would get us like horse bones and stuff. And so we would bring all these elements on stage. And that's also when we realized that like metal went from being everywhere to feeling like if you're really into metal, like you felt kind of like an endangered species by like 94, 95,
Yeah.
especially in the Bay Area, because, wherever it's kind of the biggest is where it usually collapses the hardest,
Right.
it was really like Machine Head was the only new heavier band in the Bay Area that was doing anything. And everybody, looked like they were like, extras
Yeah.
in
New metal band.
NWA video ever. They just, it was all like big work jackets and flat brim hats and like, basketball jerseys and chain wallets and shit. And we weren't interested in that at all. So then we're like, okay, well, no more shorts, none of that stuff. Like, let's get some fucking jeans, let's get some leather jackets. Like, all of a sudden it became like important to be like, we are a metal band. We play death metal. This is metal. And then coupled with all the the pig blood and the worms and stuff, so our gigs changed a lot, and we also had a lot of problems. Like we would play a lot of places once and they would be like, never come back. Like with the first time we played in LA, we were literally told we will never play this town again. And I was like,
Damn.
I can't believe somebody said that. It was like, this is like a cartoon. Like what?
What?
um, so yeah, everywhere we went, we were kind of making a mess and pissing people off. And, then, really, once we were able to kind of do, go from making tapes to making like split 7 inches and stuff, the artwork became more like photo focused, and that was a lot of that was Ross. He's an art graduate. And it was a weird thing because Cole and Ross and I, all three of us were like comic book fans. All three of us were into tabletop role playing games. All three of us drew,
Yeah.
which was kind of great and kind of horrible because like when you're all sort of right on top of each other and everyone is in each other's lane constantly, there's like a lot of friction. Uh,
Uh-huh.
so it was, it was good and it was bad, but we were always heavily invested in the idea of, if not doing all the artwork ourselves, being really tightly controlling of it, because I felt like it was really an important part of the whole thing, going back to, Maiden and everybody else, it's like in those days, obviously, you bought music at the store. So what was going to make you buy a record by a band you'd never heard of? You needed a cool logo.
What you
You needed,
saw.
you needed the artwork to tell you what was going on, and that's kind of how we got to the first Exhumed cover, which ended up, really getting a lot of attention and publicity, there was the biggest thing that helped sell that record was the cover art. As much as it's, kind of goofy and very crude, um, you know, that was, I mean, like Hit Parader hit up Relapse. So like, we need this album. We're going to review it.
No shit.
They're like, Hit Parader doesn't review our stuff. They're like, yeah, we got to review this. Like, this is so fucked up. We have to put it in there. And we got a lot of bad reviews, but they were like, a page of text and then the box in color with the album cover telling you how shitty it was. So that, that was really helpful.
There's no such thing as bad publicity.
Right. And I mean, like, the thing that album had going for it is that, I mean, none of us even really thought we did a good job on it when it came out. We weren't really happy with it, but it didn't sound like a normal death metal album. It didn't look like a normal death metal album. People kind of dismissed death metal as sort of boring and safe. And here's this album. I don't know if it's good, but it's not boring and it's not safe.
That's right.
And so, it was, I feel like, honestly, like my whole career trajectory is sort of defined by these kinds of moments. We got signed to Relapse because of the Hemdale Exhumed split. Us and Hemdale both got signed. Hemdale, at that time had a lot more momentum than us and a lot more juice in the scene. They ended up splitting up, and we were like, well, we've got this ball. We're going to run as far as we can with it. And we did this record. They gave us $1,800 to make the record, which is nothing. Even in 1998, it's nothing. That tells you how much expectation they had. And somehow we're just like, well, through sheer force of will and stubbornness and persistence, we're going to parlay this into as much as we can. And even with how Gruesome came about as Death to All, the first tour, they were going to get Stefan from Obscura to play guitar and sing these songs, but the people that were organizing the tour didn't know what they were doing, so this visa didn't get approved. And it's 9 days before, and they're scrambling. They need someone in California that can play guitar and sing, and they called me, and I was like, yes. And then that sort of led into this whole fucking 10-year, side quest. I mean, even the way I played in guitar and Repulsion for like 4 or 5 years back in like the beginning of the 2000s, or like 2003 to 8 or something. I don't know. Anyway, I got that gig because they wanted Cole, the Exhumed drummer, who had quit Exhumed by this time. So I guess it was 2004. He had quit Exhumed by this time, but they wanted him to play drums, and he needed someone to learn the songs and practice with. And I just was there, and Aaron Freeman decided to quit the band, and they're like, well, this guy's here already and he knows the songs. And I was like, cool, I'm going to take this ball and run with it. And so that's been like that's the whole theme, is like, it doesn't matter if you're not someone's first pick. If you're the guy that's there, like, just show up and do what you can,
That's right.
And, that's what we did with the first few Exhumed records. And then when we came back, we did this tour with Macabre in 2011, and they had our old driver crew guy. He would come up and do like the Albert Fish bits in the suit, and we're like, this guy's really good. Like, he's got a thing. Like, we should do something with this. And so I was like, well, you need to come up with a character for us. And so, the surgeon motif is, it's one of those things where I didn't want to do it because it would seem too obvious, but it was like, well, it's the only choice because it's so obvious and it's shorthand. You don't have to explain to people what it is. They look, they're like, yes, got it. Okay, good. Now I can focus on the fact that he's spraying blood on me. And, and when the band came back, I was like, I don't want to, even at the end, the first time, I was like, I don't want to fucking dick around with like the chainsaws and all this stuff. And our bass player used to puke on stage, and I was like, you don't have to do that anymore. Let's just play the songs. And when we started playing again, people were like, how come you're not puking on anybody? Like, how come there's no chainsaw, this and that? And I was like, fuck, all right, well, if we have this guy, this character that can do all this stuff, then we can find a balance between, this sort of pseudo Kiss,
Yeah, the
exciting
spectacle and the performance.
glamour. Yeah. And then we can do again more like Maiden, like there's like four bands I reference for everything. It's like Maiden, Metallica, Death, Repulsion.
Yep.
Um, anyway,
Yeah.
that was, so it's like, okay, if we create this character, the character can pour blood on people, the character can wield the chainsaw, we can just play guitar. Because nobody says, oh, Adrian Smith's not a real guitar player. All he is some guy that, explodes. It's like, no, because they have Eddie to do all the explosions. And then
Yeah.
people can be like, oh, Adrian Smith is a guitar player. And so I was like, this is a nice kind of separation. And then, we did the second record after we came back. And then we thought, well, we have this character. Maybe we should put him on the album cover. I guess we should, if this is what we're doing, let's turn into that aesthetic. And so, that's what we did for the next few records.
Yeah, man. Um, it catching the live performance at, the GOAT of all places, man. I was I was in the crowd. I started off in, like, right up front, and then when the surgeon comes out and he had like, the sander and all the sparks were going off, and, like, a spark hit me, I was like, "Oh, no. I'm done." I went to the side, and I caught the rest of the show. I was like, "I ain't trying to catch on fire. Fuck this."
Well, it's definitely a thing where, I mean, at our shows, there's, usually it's the younger kids are up front, which is good because, people, I mean, honestly, dude, once you pass 35, man, like, I don't want to be up front, man. Like, I just want to watch the show and have a beer and like enjoy it. And, if I go up front, every once in a blue moon, I'll go up front for like a couple songs. And I'm like, okay, that was fun. Okay, great. Now I'm ready to go. Like when Sepultura did that Beneath the Remains tour where Dan from Gruesome played guitar with them. I went to that in LA and I was like, okay, this is so good. I gotta watch like two songs up front. So I went up front, saw that, hey, cool. I was like, all right, cool. Got shoved around. I was like, all right, y'all, like, old man, gotta go. Please let
Yeah.
me go back to the
Yeah.
bar now. I'm just gonna sit. And the next day I was like, I don't know what this muscle is, but apparently I used it last night. It fucking hurts. Um, but yeah, at our shows, the kids are like, yes, please pour more blood on me, please,
Yeah.
and then the
It
people
fiends
that,
for it, man.
right, the people that are like, oh yeah, I saw you guys on the Slaughter Cold tour in '01. They're at the back and like, oh, it's a good show. Cool. I hope they play, whatever song.
Like, and I think it's funny because, like, a lot of, a lot of the younger generation, they're probably up front, just watching you doing this number, and they're not ready for it. They're not ready for, what comes next, and it just fucks up their fucking phone and shit. Like, that's what you get.
I mean, it's, the thing is that it's supposed to be, any live performance is supposed to be like an interaction between the audience and the performers, right?
Right.
This isn't, Broadway. This isn't opera. You don't sit and just politely applaud, like you're supposed to be in there with the band. And, that's, you know, what I enjoy as an audience member too. Like I want to sing along. I want to shout. I want to clap my hands and this and that, I just don't necessarily want to get shoved by a bunch of people that are 25 years younger than me for 45 minutes because, I'm old. Uh,
Yeah.
but I want to be involved. I want to be part of the thing that's happening, and that's what we want, especially with Exhumed, is that it's it kind of doesn't work if the audience isn't willing to, get their hands dirty, literally and figuratively. Uh,
Yeah, no.
so it's, it's like, it's weird to be at this point in having done the band for so long to have shows sometimes even now where you're like, well, that just didn't work. Like it went from being an okay show to being like kind of like a lame gig because the people up front were like, oh God, I didn't think you were going to do this on me. I thought you were just going to, but more often than not, it works. Either people know or they kind of get caught up in what we're doing, and that's the idea.
Yeah. I know a lot of artists, always treat their albums, as their children and whatnot. So I have to ask you, man, like, what was probably, one of the funnest records you got to record, What was, I mean, the best experience you had as a musician to record in studio?
Hmm. I mean, I guess there's two that kind of come to mind, and for really different reasons. We did the third Exhumed record, in Anatomy is Destiny. We did with Neil Kernan, and the first one, the engineer was this guy that sucked, and then we had James Murphy mixing it, and he's like, I can't mix this, it's all wrong, and so that's why it came out, fucked up sounding. The second one we did with Mieszko from Nazem, who was our buddy, and that was really fun. But the Neil Kernan was like, you know, it was just like, it was fun. He had a great work ethic, but it was like learning from it was like watching the master at work. You know what I mean? Like, here's
Yeah.
the guy that recorded, fucking Rage for Order and Under Lock and Key and fucking Hall and Oates. And like, when he worked at Trident Studios, he's an assistant engineer on fucking Unleashed in the East. You know what I mean? Like, so every day was not only fun, and we'd practiced a lot, so we felt really prepared, and like, this is, I had just gone through this gnarly breakup, so all I was doing was playing guitar. I'd go to work and then I'd play guitar. Or I'd go to work, then I'd go to rehearsal, then I'd come home and play guitar. So we were all playing, as well as we could. We felt confident, we felt good about the songs, we knew them inside and out. And so we didn't spend the time in the studio with those kinds of issues. We we were able to really take in what Neil was doing and watch him work and watch how he worked and how he approached things. And even though like a lot of the technical stuff is still over my head to this day and was way over my head then, just watching him work and listening to what he valued and the way he went about things was so fucking valuable. Like, I felt like I came out on the other side like I had completed a course or something. And it just changed my whole perspective about recording forever, because I used to kind of not really like recording because
Mhm.
it felt sort of like, well, some days are better than others and you just don't know. Like, maybe you're going to go in on a bad day, maybe you're going on a good day and whatever. Um, and working with somebody that was that professional really opened my eyes to about how to make a record. And, ever since, I've everything I've done since I've gone into at least feeling like I knew where I wanted to go and I knew the steps that I wanted to take to get there. It didn't always work out the way I wanted, and you have to change along the way or whatever. Not every time was a a home run, but at least I had the tools to embark on the project, whereas before it just felt like a dice roll.
Right.
And Neil is a lovely guy. He's hilarious. We would bug him for all these stories, like fucking working on Dream Warriors and, the meeting between fucking Wes Craven and Dokken and the record company
That's fucking
execs,
insane.
recording Hall and Oates and working for 4 hours and calling a modeling agency and a Coke dealer. And then that's the rest of your day. I was just like, oh my God, like, holy shit. So anyway, it just, it was fun. It was really, really just a powerful learning experience that gave me all these tools to use. And then the other one would be when we did Horror, the first record we did here, because I was in here with Mike, our drummer, and Dylan, Dr. Filthy, the surgeon. They're both construction guys. I'm an idiot. But I can wheelbarrow trash and I can hold drywall up and I can go to the store and buy the nails they tell me to buy and that kind of shit. And we were in here, again, it was like every day after work, we weren't rehearsing the songs, but we're putting up drywall. We're building stuff. We're fucking building a drum riser. We're, cutting up tire tread for the insulation for the floor. And we're putting this thing together and we're building the room. We're getting the computer set up and installing Pro Tools and doing all this stuff. And then making the record, we didn't mix it, but, basically the guy, Alejandro, who worked with us for years, he was our live sound guy. He helped me get all these endorsements. We worked with him forever. He's almost in as close to being in the band as you can be without being on stage with us. Um, he's recording us, and we're there learning how to do all this ourselves and building the studio and putting the recording rig together and then doing the recording. And that again was just another, thing where I came out of it feeling like, yeah, I just learned so much. That was like, that was the next step into like, cool, how are we making these records? Like, how does this really work and what can we do? And it goes back to the same attitude that we had, in the early 90s of like, we want to control our music. We want to control the art. We want to control the production. We want to have, our hand in every aspect. And it was like, well, now we have our own fucking studio. So we can do even more of this in house and not have to worry about the whims and vagaries of the label and of some guy that thinks our record should sound some other way than we want or whatever. And,
Right.
that's really empowering.
Yeah, and, horror speaking of horror, that came out just before COVID, right? If my memory serves?
Yeah, I think we had done. Yeah, it was the last one that came out before COVID, but we did some touring for it. We did at least one full tour, and then we had a bunch of stuff planned that all got canceled.
Yeah. Yeah, because, I remember, whenever, Relapse had because I had being a nerd that I am, I gotta, subscribe to Relapse's, newsletter and whatnot, and I remember whenever, your promo and the video for the first single dropped, I was like, "Holy shit, dude." Like, I was geeked for it, and, they had, uh the old soft porn, man. You can't go wrong with the soft porn fucking meets, chainsaw. It was great. I just loved it.
That record in particular was one where, you know every record you have these objectives, and they all work to some extent or another. That one was one where just everything kind of clicked correctly, and everything, you think about it in your head and you're like, well, we're going to do this and that, and then you do it and you're like, well, I like it, but that one was like, no, this all totally fit. The piece of the puzzle went the way that we thought they were going to go. The artwork was great. The packaging was great. The video turned out great. We did like this whole album YouTube full album stream thing that
Yeah.
was ridiculous, super over the top, and it was really fucking fun. And it all just kind of, yeah, it just worked for that one. The record we did after To the Dead, it's more of a normal Exhumed album musically. I wasn't as happy with some of the design elements of it, and the production. I think maybe we tried to do something that I don't know if it completely worked.
Mhm.
Uh, but horror, I feel like every box got checked correctly,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's always nice when that happens because it's not always the case.
Man, and during that time, you put out those albums. You, I mean, obviously, tone is a huge, aspect of the recording process, and you met, you started this relationship with Michael Klein,
Yeah,
and tell me how that came about.
I mean, Michael Klein is a person that I cannot say enough good things about. I met him when we were on tour with Carcass and Obituary in Kansas. It was Carcass's B Market Surgical Steel tour. And I was just at the bar, and he comes up to me and he's like, "Hey, I don't want to be annoying, but I kind of want to pick your brain a little bit. Like, can I buy you a drink?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure, whatever." And he's like, "Well, what do you want?" I was like, "I don't know, just Miller Lite or something." And he's like, "Dude, I'm an optometrist. Like, you can get something better than that." I was like, "Oh, well, in that case, uh, it's a Johnny Walker Black, neat, and like this way we can talk longer." And he's like, "Hey, I'm an optometrist, but I'm also a guitar nerd, and I build these pedals, and I want to build something for you." And I was like, "Why? Okay." And so we talked, and he's like, we just talked kind of about my ideas about tone and his ideas about tone, and what we thought was good, and um, and so the first thing he built for me was this preamp pedal um, that I did use on To the Dead. No, I used it on Death Revenge actually, and it's the same circuit as the old Ampeg VH140C. I'm not like a gear nerd, but amps I at least I'm interested in. I don't know, I couldn't tell you about all the intricacies or whatever, but I know which amps I like. And
Yeah.
I had that amp in high school. It's the Effigy, the Forgotten amp, the old ASUC amp. That's the considered dead amp. And whenever that amp died or whatever happened to it, maybe it got stolen. Anyway, no, it died. My 5150 got stolen. Anyway, I just never see them around. They're not that common. And so he built me this preamp that has the same circuit. And I kind of, I was like, what a lovely guy, this and that. But I was just like, he's an optometrist from Missouri. Like, who knows? Who knows if he's ever going to build me anything? And even if he does, you know, who knows? It could be a piece of shit, whatever. But he's a nice guy, and had a great job.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So he sends me the pedal, and I'm like, okay, all right, well, let's see. And I was like, fuck. Huh. And as time goes by, it's great once Sebastian joined, because Sebastian is a gear nerd. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
we'll have a great conversation. I'll be in it for about the first 45 minutes. And then they get into like resistors, capacitors. And then I'm like, yeah, I'm out. I don't know about this.
You're done checked out.
Right. So, and then, he's like, well, what do you need live? Cause I was like, should I get a splitter? So I'm running the preamp into one cabinet, and I was like, I don't know, it's kind of elaborate. I'm always looking at something I can set up really fast, and less is more on stage. I don't want to be dicking around with a bunch of stuff. And then if something goes wrong, the more complicated it is, the harder time I'm going to have fixing it. And then it's the whole thing. Even though what I'm talking about is still pretty basic. But I was like, well, what about like, just a one and done lead thing where you got reverb, you got delay, and you got boost. And that became the Lonely Ghost pedal. And I'm not sure if Sebastian came up with a concept, or I came up with it, or somehow. I know I came up with the name because Michael was like, so how much reverb do you want? Like, I mean, I could soak it. And I was like, well, I mean, I want a lot, but not too crazy. And I was like,
Yeah.
that Immolation song on the second album that starts off with that bendy guitar riff, and it's all delay and reverbed out, and it sounds like a lonely ghost. Like, that's what I want. And so, whatever, that's my contribution. um,
I'm
and
still
that,
trying to get that pedal from him, by the way.
dude, well, I mean, he's just one guy, and he's got to
I
work.
know. I know.
And, you know, but he's incredible. I'm dying to get an amp built by him. But then I'm also I'm kind of afraid, because if I really like it, I'm going to want to take it on tour. And the idea of taking a hand wired, like handmade amp on tour just seems stupid. But I think by the time we do the next Exhumed record, I will probably get an amp from him.
Yeah,
He
man.
builds a lot of stuff and just gives it to me, and I'm like, well, you're not gonna, he can't afford to give me an amp, and I'm certainly not, that much of a dick that I would expect that or ask for that.
Yeah, he's such a homie, man. I fucking love Michael with everything in my core, because recently my house flooded,
oh no,
and dude, like he built the latest pedal, I forgot which one, but it was worth, someone like bought it for $300, and all the proceeds came to me. And I was like, bruh, are you serious right now, Michael? And so, I'm, thank
that's
you,
the
Michael.
right
I
guy.
love you, dude.
He is really just one of the most genuinely nice people.
And,
Now,
and
every time we see him on tour, if I don't remember to like before we sit down, I have to like give the server my credit card, or he'll like pay for dinner. I'm like, don't stop fucking doing this, dude. Stop. Like, let us do something nice for you. Like, please.
Yeah, and dude, like one of the coolest things, like like in addition to like that fundraiser, he built his painkiller
Yeah.
pedal, okay? And I told him like I wanted him to spec it out with the Marine Corps colors
Oh, that's sick.
because I'm a Marine, I'm an old grunt, and you know, I hate to put him on blast because he might get a bunch of veterans hitting him up now. But, you know, he I said, "Well, how much I owe you?" And he was like, "How many years did you serve?" And I was like, "8." And he figured he figured out the cost. He broke down the cost of the pedal by year. He says, "Well, you have this much of a discount for your service. Thank you." I
That
was like, "You son of a bitch."
he works at the VA, you know? I mean,
Yeah,
like,
yeah, that too.
it's like not only is he helping people just as an optometrist in general, he's at the fucking VA helping people that need it more and making less money doing it. Like,
Yeah.
that's just the kind of person that he is. And it's also worth mentioning that the Exhumed record that we're working on currently, we're I mean, we're just, now that we all have our own studios and shit, we just take for fucking ever, which is the downside of all that. But we've been working on it now for like, I don't know, 3 months or something stupid. But I got on Zoom with him and Sebastian, and I was like, okay, guys, so for this guitar tone, what are we doing? Here's everything I got. What are the combos that are going to work? And, I'm those, like I said, they're the gear nerds. I'm just like, I like good tone. I care about it. I don't know as much under the hood. And so they made some suggestions and some different combos, including the painkiller that's on there. Um, and, I'm really happy with what we came up with, because I wanted to, without getting too super detailed,
Yeah,
uh, usually I'll do 4 rhythm guitars, like 2 per voice, 2 per side kind of thing. And this album, Sebastian's been telling me for years, oh, it's too many guitars, blah, blah, blah. It's too muddy, this and that. Um, and so I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to do 2 then. Fuck it. Let's just do 2. But we came up with a few different tone combinations, and there was just 3 that we all liked so much. I was like, well, all right, we'll do 3 tracks this time, because I was like, I just can't ditch it. The painkiller was the one that was kind of the dark horse, because it's not, it's a little bit closer to like a rat pedal,
yeah,
uh, and that's not usually what I go for. Um, but it just, and when I heard it by itself, I was like, yeah, I like this tone, but it's not really like, eh. But then when I heard it blended with the other stuff, I was like, ooh, oh, shit. All right, now I gotta keep this. Like, we gotta use it. Like, okay, we're just gonna do 3 guitars this
hell yeah, man.
time.
Fucking, I love everything that he brings to the table, man, and I'm looking forward to whatever he puts out. I mean, I've heard the hand wired amp that he's building for Sammy, with a bunch of shows that he did, and it's just fucking brutal sounding. The tone is just fucking amazing.
I'm sure.
So, and I'm sure, like, once you get your own amp by Michael Klein up and running, that's gonna be fucking something else to behold.
Yep. It was kind of like, you know, like I said, I'm scared because I'm gonna like it too much, and then I'm gonna do something foolish with it on tour, or something bad's gonna happen to it, And it's almost like, for years I avoided playing Soldanos because I was like, I'll never afford a Soldano. And then finally, Sebastian he didn't trick me. He talked me into playing one, and I was like, fuck. This is such a good amp, and it's like exactly the kind of amp I like. And I was like, yeah, but I don't have $4,000 just laying around to buy another amp. So great, cool. Thanks for that. Thanks for just answering this, unfulfilled desire, in me. I appreciate that.
Will there be any more Pounder records?
Probably not. I mean, I think, with that band, we had a lot of fun at first, and then we couldn't really find a steady drummer.
Mhm.
And so it would be like, when people would offer us gigs, we couldn't really do them. We had like 4 or 5 of our different friends fill in. And then we had a couple people come and audition, and then I realized that Tom and Alejandro were incredibly picky about who was going to play drums. Where I was like, well, I think we could probably work with this, right? And they're like, no, it's got to be. I was like, oh fuck. And so it just, the prospect of it being a live band just kept dwindling and dwindling to the, at the point where the last album we made, the third one, Thunder Forged, I used to, I would write riffs and I'd be like, well, I'll try to keep it a little simpler because I probably can't play and sing that. And on this one, I was like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I'll ever play these songs live. So I'll just make it as fucking involved as I want to. And, you know, we're all kind of, very entrenched in sort of different things at this point. So probably not. I mean, I had a lot of fun writing the songs and I wish we could have done a little bit more with it. But, at the end of the day, hey, it was a good time. It was fun, and especially I think the second record that we did, I think worked pretty fucking well. There's some issues with the first and third, but the second one I think is firing on all cylinders.
Man, and since you're a horror, or like maybe even a movie buff, I guess I just want to switch gears and see like what are some of the movies that as that as of recent releases in the horror genre that got you going, hey, you got something there, or something you watched was like, dude, this fucking sucked.
I mean, you know, it's weird because my wife doesn't really like horror movies, but she's recently gotten on kind of like an A24 kick, which was
Yeah,
surprising to me.
yeah.
So we've seen like, oh Jesus, what the fuck? I just had it. It went right out of my brain. The one where it's the military film where they're just trapped in that room for the whole film. It's not. It's. I mean, to me, it almost didn't really feel like a horror movie. But I guess the way she kind of sold it to me was like, "Oh, it's a horror movie. It's A24 thing." And I was like, "Well, it's not. It's not exactly horror, but it's just really tense. It's like
Yeah, really.
2 hours of being trapped. I can't remember if it's Desert Storm or Iraq or one of those scenarios, and you're just in this room with these like 5 or 6 people trying to survive for 2 hours, and it's just this really tense claustrophobic movie.
Mhm.
Warfare, that's what it's called. Warfare. Jeez.
Okay.
I knew I was like, it's got some basic ass name, like really simple. And I thought that was pretty good. But I don't really watch a lot of the newer horror films. Like
Yeah.
I mean, it's just I just don't keep up with it that much because I think there's so much older stuff that I haven't seen that I have so much fun watching. And, also, I mean, I just watch a lot of fucking like comic book movies since I was a comic book guy. And there's so much of that it's really time consuming, honestly. Just, I have a hard time watching that much stuff. Um,
Yeah.
but I've been watching like, a lot of stuff on Tubi and a lot of stuff of the old stuff on Amazon Prime. And like I'd never seen The Devil's Reign somehow.
Mhm.
That was fucking great. I love that movie. I'd seen a bunch of the Hammer stuff, but I'd never seen Twins of Evil. I saw that fairly recently, and I loved that. That's become like my favorite Hammer movie. It's just got like a nice blend of you know everything that you love about Hammer. There's just like
Yeah.
tits and overacting, and these like medieval settings, and
Shit, yes.
it's great, man.
Yeah.
And it's just it's a whole genre into itself, and so it's more stuff like that I'll watch. I kind of went through a phase where I was watching some of these like apocalyptic movies, the Astronomer, and some of those, like kind of like the knockoffs of the Omen kind of genre.
Mhm.
There's a bunch of good ones in there. You know, so I mean, I try to keep up on it, but I mean, I guess I've been reading more horror comics lately than movies, and again, just reading all the old Skywald stuff, Nightmare and Psycho, and I get these really good eerie compilations and stuff. And there's a company now that does. It's called Warrant Publishing, like Warren Publishing, and they do Shudder and Vampirus Carmilla, and they have another one. but those two I read pretty regularly, and it's just fun, Warren Mag, creepy, eerie type shit. So,
Hell yeah, man.
I try to keep up on a lot of this stuff. I just the issue is that there's so much that I want to watch and so much that I want to read and so little time, you know.
Yeah.
Because I also like watching stuff that's just regular shows. Like my wife's British, so we watch a lot of like British cop shows. And like I hate American cop shows, but I love British cop shows because it's always about how the cops are fucked up. And it's like, okay, cool. um,
I, I
and
was I was big into Luther whenever it came out.
Luther was sick, man. Yeah.
Yeah.
uh, there was one called The Bodyguard that was quite good. There's the new one called Department Q that's Scottish that I just started watching. Um, Broadchurch was really good. There's a few like that. Um, anyway, so it's tough to like just find the time
Yeah.
to do all this. Like I listen to a couple comic book podcasts while I walk the dogs every day, and there's these guys and they're reading like 20 comics a week to talk about on this podcast, and then they're recommending other comics and then shows. I'm like, how the fuck, like, what is all you guys do, like watch TV and read? Like, is that it? Like, fuck, man. Like I don't even have like a real job, and I don't have time to do all this. It's so,
Yeah, you have some like husky looking type dogs.
yeah. Yeah, I got a German Shepherd and a Husky mix, and
Okay, it's a husky mix. Okay. Yeah, there's some beautiful dogs, man. When I saw you post them, I was like, "Holy shit. I think he has two huskies." And because my wife and I we actually have three huskies of our own.
okay.
And yeah,
Don't
I
let
mean,
them in the room you're in now.
what's that?
Don't let them in that room you're in right now. That's
The
what.
doors are closed.
Yeah. The downstairs is like, if we're not cooking or in the backyard, we're like, okay, we're gonna plan the living room night tonight. So it's like, okay, we get out the vacuum, you get out the brush for the couch. Okay, we gotta brush the dogs. It's a whole
It's a
production.
whole thing.
And you're like, okay, cool. Now we can sit down here and watch a couple movies and this and that. But yeah, we have a very small house for two 80-pound dogs. So it's yeah.
Yeah, we we have three huskies and a labradoodle. He's our oddball. And he does more of the the protection, that he's more of the guard dog than they are. They couldn't be bothered. Like someone walks by the house, they're like, fuck it. But the doodle makes all the fucking noise. And it's so funny because like whenever one of them starts howling, he wants to join in and howl. It's fucking great.
Uh,
I'll email you a video of that. It's fucking brilliant. But
I'll play with my wife, and then she'll play it to make our dogs howl. That's like her. She'll go on YouTube, like, fuck, man. We would come home from the bar all hammered, and she'd be like, "Check this out! Just put on YouTube, like the howling dogs to make our dogs howl." And I was like, "Oh my god, our neighbor's gonna kill us! It's fucking 12:30 at night, Thursday night. Fuck." But
I was this morning I was trading stories with Jared Pritchard about, because he got two huskies now. And I was like, dude, I don't know about you, but no, he asked me, he's like, do you have an air tag or anything like that, or are you not cool with air? Like, no, that's essential. Like huskies, dude, I mean, as probably good as I do, they're fucking escape artists.
they do love to just go. They don't want to like run away forever. They just want to go over somewhere. Ours is now she's 11, so she's calmed down a bit. But you know, a lot of times I let her off leash when we're walking for the end, just to just let her have a bit of fun.
Yeah.
But good 20% of the time I regret it. She's just out like looking at squirrels, looking at this, looking at that. It's fucking ridiculous. So, but I mean, we need a little bit of chaos in our lives with the dogs, or else it'd be too boring.
Yeah, 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 absolutely, man. They definitely keep you on your toes and then some.
Yep. It's the unconditional love and the chaos. Yeah,
Yep.
that's what you need.
Matt, thank you so much for joining me, man. This was I really enjoyed it. This was so fun for me. I've been wanting to do it, and I'm glad we were able to get it done today, man.
Okay, man. I'm glad we made it happen. Thank you for having me, and let me know when it's going to be out there for the universe, and I'll try to let people know about it.
Oh yeah, will do. I'll email you a copy, and you can do whatever you want with it, sir. And if we haven't mentioned it, I mean, the latest gruesome release, Silent Echoes. If you're a fan of death, fan of Death's Human, give it a listen, give it a rip.
It's out now, so yeah, please buy it, check it out, steal it, stream it.
Buy it, steal it.
Hell yeah! All right, thank you
Yeah,
so
brother.
much, man. Absolute pleasure.
Absolute pleasure, though. Thank you.
All right, bud.